Senator Siewert.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I'd like today to speak about the legislation that was tabled in the House of Representatives today that deals with truancy. The Minister for Education, Julia Gillard, today tabled a bill in the House of Representatives that gives the government the power to cut off or even cancel welfare payments to parents whose children do not attend school. This is the Minister for Education and Social Inclusion. This is the most exclusionary piece of legislation I have seen in a long time, and how the Minister can juxtapose those two particular parts of her portfolio beat me. It is telling that the very first piece of legislation put forward by the Rudd government to enact their promised so-called education revolution in our schools is a piece of populist and punitive piece of legislation that demonises parents on welfare and is likely to lead, in fact, to worse outcomes for many disadvantaged students. It is also telling that this is a scheme for which there is no evidence base from a government that claims to have evidence-based policy, and that it is one I also note from the media that their own caucus is struggling to deal with. As the ACOS President Lynn Hatfield-Dodds said in the media earlier this week, income management is a blunt instrument to address the complex reasons that children may not be attending school, and there is no evidence that it will work. Suspension of income support payments is a harsh penalty which itself poses a serious threat to family and child well-being. Many of the families affected by these proposals are already living on low incomes, and the suspension of payments will increase hardship and poverty. Suspension of income support is discriminatory. It only affects parents on the lowest incomes. All parents, that's my emphasis, are legally required to enrol their children in school. These laws should be enforced and backed by support services. The Greens have had a very quick look at the legislation since it was only tabled this morning, and we are very, very definitely not impressed. Not only does it allow Centrelink bureaucrats to suspend income payments for 13 weeks or more, it allows them to cancel them altogether. Yes, that's right. You can have your income support cancelled absolutely completely by our reading of that legislation. And let's stop for a minute to look at how the department finds out about how a child has in fact not been at school. As we understand and interpret the legislation, the school is required to notify the department. Let's stop and consider that. That means that school principal will have a list of every family on income support in that district. That is simply outrageous. Why don't we take a sign up everywhere to tell everybody in the suburb which families are on income support? Has anyone stopped to consider that is so totally unfair? And what about that family's privacy? Are we demonising people so much in this community now that we're going to send a list to school of families that are on income support? This is not decent public policy. These are major changes to the lives of the most disadvantaged children and their families, for which there's no evidence. Have teachers been consulted? Have educational specialists been consulted? Have child development specialists been consulted? And what's more, has the community been consulted? Well, no, they haven't. The ALP have continued to say that they are committed to an evidence-based policy, but I challenge the Minister to produce the evidence that cutting welfare payments will lead to increased school attendance and better outcomes for the most disadvantaged of our children. As I understand it, the trial in Halls Creek didn't succeed in getting any more kids into school. What did succeed is producing and providing more teachers, a better education system, and a system that actually is culturally appropriate. I challenge the Minister to produce the evidence to justify a measure that exclusively targets families on welfare. Are these really the only families in our country where the kids are playing truant? I think not. This is a completely wrong-headed approach. The factors contributing to poor school attendance include a lack of basic education and support services in disadvantaged areas, poor quality education programs, bullying, inadequate and insecure housing and a range of health problems, including and particularly hearing problems, curriculums that are not culturally appropriate and do not meet the needs of the students. As parents, we know that most young people love school, are excited to learn. In fact, some are even keen to go on weekends. and look forward to the opportunity to interact with their peers. It takes a few years of bad experiences before a child reaches the point that they dislike being at school so much that they are prepared to play truant. I also note that for younger students in particular, a parent's bad experience in school can also reflect their interaction with the school system. The implication of Julia Gillard's new policy is that truancy is simply a result of a failure of the parents. And in particular, of course, she's targeting the parents of disadvantaged families. And it's the proposition behind her proposal is therefore they are failing to force their children to go to school. But where older children so dislike school, let's look at some of the reasons why we see older children perhaps not going to school, besides the ones that I've just mentioned in terms of poor culturally appropriate education systems. They're failing in classes and are feeling humiliated because they are not engaged and are getting bored. Or perhaps they are being discriminated against, or they are being bullied, and to such an extent that they don't want to go to school. This is clearly a failure of the system, not of the parents. Often by this time also, kids are so educationally disadvantaged there is little hope for them to be able to catch up with their peers and re-engage in the system. So in some areas we're talking, for some of these students, there's a real also issue of shame, which further enforces their isolation from the school system. I cannot believe for 1 minute that anybody who has been a parent of a teenager who is having a rough time at school could think that for 1 minute this measure is going to do anything